Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Maine Parent Federation's webinar. It's okay to be overwhelmed, a conversation about special education, homeschooling, and how to cope during the COVID-19 emergency. A few things before we get started with the webinar. I wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this webinar and we will make it available on our website as well as our social media pages and on YouTube. We are also live streaming this webinar on Facebook, and Facebook automatically records and gets the recorded webinar up minutes after usually we have completed the webinar. If you are joining us on Facebook, please use the chat book on Facebook. I have a staff member, Dylan Campbell, monitoring the chat messages on Facebook for questions. And please use the chat box on Zoom for any questions you might have. I'll look in those as we move through the webinar with any questions that you may have so I can address them live. So we'll get started. Maine Parent Federation is a nonprofit grant-funded organization, so we do not profit on any of the information that we provide any families or professionals. We have nothing to gain by providing this information. We only look to assist families and professionals who work with them who have children with special healthcare needs, access the services and resources that they need to navigate, and we help parents and families navigate any system of care that they come into contact with. So to start with, I want to review our rights under IDEA. I think it's important to understand IDEA, and particularly free and appropriate public education, as that's going to be key for individuals to understand as they look to protect their rights during homeschooling during COVID-19, if you have a child with an IEP. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, this is the law that allows children with disabilities to access a free and appropriate public education. Which important to remember is free and appropriate public education is often referred to as FAPE, and that means that your child gets the same access to an education that typically developing students get. So we need to think about applying FAPE during COVID-19, and there are important things to remember because this looks a little bit differently than if you were applying FAPE to if school were in session. So important things to remember is that if your child's school is closed, and all public schools at this point are closed, they are not providing at-home learning to anybody, then FAPE does not apply. Basically how this is interpreted is nobody has access to a public education if the school has decided to remain closed and is not providing either virtual learning or at-home packets for any of their students. Then the access that your student is entitled to is the same access that all students are entitled to, and nobody has access. So if nobody has access, that means that they're not obligated to provide you with access just because you have an IEP. This is how FAPE is being interpreted. This is how the Office of Special Education Programs at the national level through Washington, D.C. is advising schools onto how to interpret FAPE at this period of time. The governor and the commissioner of Maine have also put out guidance for in-classroom instruction to not resume for the rest of the school year. They have not put out guidance yet on extended school year services, so keep your eyes open for that. We are not sure how they're going to move forward with the extended school year. This still remains a local district decision. That being said, all local districts and public schools have mostly followed the governor and the commissioner's guidance. So at this point in time, if you have not heard from your local district, you should expect to hear from them this upcoming week as to how they plan to move forward. But you can presume that local public schools will probably not reopen until September, and to prepare for at-home and virtual learning during this period of time. If your child's school is closed and they are providing at-home learning, then your child should be receiving the same access. So if they're providing access through virtual learning and assistive technology such as computers and iPads, your student should and is entitled to receive the same free and appropriate public education. So they should be receiving the same access. So they should have the same access to things like Google Classroom, which is what I know a lot of school districts are using as a virtual platform. Some are using Zoom as well. And so students should have that same access that all typically developing students do have access to. And your accommodations and modifications should be applied to your access to this technology. And I'll provide some examples for that as well as we get more into this workshop and webinar. We do need to remember at this time that nobody's getting a full day of learning. Typically, developing students aren't getting 6 hours of learning. Therefore, what you are receiving for your child will also be abbreviated. So we can't take the hours that are written in the IEP and apply them directly to the virtual at-home learning or in-home packets that you're getting. You shouldn't expect that your child is going to sit there and allow you to educate them for 6 hours if a typically developing student isn't going to sit there and allow their parents to teach them for 6 hours. And most kiddos who are in the older school years, who are on their own in middle school and high school, they're getting 2 to 3 hours a day of virtual learning or in-home support. So what you need to do is think about what a typically developing student is getting and apply it to what your access should be, which would be the same with the appropriate accommodations and modifications. So if your child gets, 2 hours of speech therapy a week, you're not going to receive access to those 2 hours of speech therapy a week. And I'll talk a little bit more about that again as we get into applying this interpretation of free and appropriate public education to things like therapies and accommodations and ed tech support. But it's not reasonable now to assume that your child's full IEP will be able to be applied at this point in time. So what does this mean for things like specially designed instruction? And this is usually the instruction that your child might get one-on-one with an ed tech or with their special education teacher. You should receive academic instruction which has been adapted and modified to meet your child's needs. So you might not necessarily be getting 6 hours per day of specially designed instruction, but what you should have access to is what the typically developing kiddos are getting, and then accommodations and modifications, which would include specially designed instruction for your child to access that lesson plan. So for example, if your child is learning about, let's see, my daughter's right now in 6th grade, 13 years old, accessing a 6th grade curriculum. And in science, she's learning about plate tectonics. Well, for Sammy, her grade reading level is probably 2nd or 3rd grade. So she doesn't have the ability to access the 6th grade reading level about plate tectonics. So what's happening is her ed tech and her special education teacher is providing us with reading materials at her grade level of reading that talks about plate tectonics. So sometimes what that means is, for example, if we're watching a video and there's a quiz afterwards, is providing a quiz for Sammy at her reading level so that she's able to access the quiz in her own way, shape, and form, and not necessarily the quiz that all the typically developing students are getting because that's at a 6th grade reading level. And a lot of times requires her to write comprehension answers as opposed to multiple choice answers, which work best for Sammy. So we're getting the information at her reading level, and we're also getting the comprehension in order to show that we watched the video. We're getting that feedback, or we're able to provide the feedback to the teachers at her level, present level of performance. So, and a lot of that has required some feedback from my part that the comprehension isn't working well, but the multiple choice does work better as long as she's able to read the questions and answer them on her own. We do have access to our ed tech, and this is a local district decision. So I would recommend checking with your local district. We have scheduled some Google Hangouts with our ed tech, and our ed tech has access to the Google Classroom platform that our school district is using. So she goes in and sees the assignments prior to us seeing the assignments, and she provides us with some guidance on what assignments might Sammy be able to attend for the typically developing classroom and what assignments might need some adaptation and modification. And she'll provide the adaptation and modification working with the special ed teacher. If you're getting at-home materials and you're not working at a virtual platform level, the materials that are coming home should have the accommodations and modifications for you at your child's present level of performance, so that your child is able to access the same curriculum, but at their levels, so that they can understand what's being asked of them and how they're reporting back is at their level so that they can show that they're doing the work. Assistive technology should be provided to you at home so your child has access to learning. If your child has an assistive technology device that prior to the COVID-19 crisis was not allowed to come home, after school or during school vacations, that device should be allowed to be brought home at this time. I know a lot of K-5 classrooms, their devices were, even for typically developing students, were kept in the classroom, and it's taken some districts a couple weeks to get those devices set up so that they can go home, and that they have sent those home now. I know middle school and high school kids a lot of times have access to computers and iPads that go back and forth anyway. So your child should be allowed to take that device home. Communication devices for children that might not have been allowed to go home before should be allowed to go home now. Also, Maine's Developmental Disability Council is accepting applications for individuals who are in need of iPads. They've acquired some iPads and they're providing those iPads to children with developmental disabilities who need access to curriculum, and families don't have access. And they're also providing them to adults who suddenly find themselves unable to access their services and unable to connect with their peers and their supports. So those are the two populations that they're providing those iPads to. If you're interested, you can contact me and I can get you in touch with the Developmental Disability Council. You can also look them up online and email them directly if that's something you're interested in. Services, so therapy services are a little bit more difficult to access and get your full amount of services. That being said, to give you an idea of what's happening in my household, we're getting about half of what's on Sammy's IEP. And we're connecting with them through Google Classroom. So we're connecting with her speech therapist as well as her occupational therapist for a half hour a week. And then the other half hour's worth of time is being done at home through some handouts that they've sent to me and exercises I can do at home. They've also allowed us to have access to different accounts like Keyboarding Without Tears, My Hear Builder. Keyboarding Without Tears is a good occupational therapy exercise you can do. My Hear Builder is a speech therapy website that her school districts use. So they have provided us with the usernames and passwords so that we can do those things at home. And they've also provided us with at-home learning packets so that it's not all virtual and online and on a computer. We're able to do some other things with her. Some good things for occupational therapy is, you know, if you have silly putty or hand putty at home for hand strengthening, just allowing your child to play with that during the course of a day. It provides us a good fidget. It also is good OT. If you're doing at-home package, just allowing your child to write is a great OT therapy. Or cutting and pasting is another great fine motor therapy. Speech therapy, we're virtual right now. So, you know, I would say doing things like phone calls or FaceTiming, if you have availability to do that with friends, provides a good social interaction for your peer and also an opportunity to work on speaking with their peers, working on conversations, asking questions. So those type of things are great ways to provide some learning that also allows your child to socially connect. So I would keep track. Some best practices are going to be keeping track of the number of hours that you feel your child is missing. But be aware that doesn't mean that the school district is going to provide catch up when we do start in classroom. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. They're called compensatory services. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the webinar, but it is good practice to keep track of the daily at-home learning that you're doing with your child in a diary, what they're accomplishing, the areas where you think they're not getting enough and where they might be regressing. You're going to need that information and that data when we do go back to school and have IEP meetings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So the services that you are receiving or have received on your IEP in the past, you probably will not be receiving a full amount of those services, but you should be expecting to at least be connecting with the therapist so that they can provide you with some exercises you can be doing at home at the very least. Behavior. We're going to see increased behaviors. And I think last week was the first week that we really started to get feedback from parents that things were kind of hitting the fan, for lack of a better term. You know, the newness of learning at home had kind of worn off. Parents are juggling working as well as trying to teach their children. And so behaviors are getting increased and they're seeing, you know, refusal from kids to do work. It's important to note that you need to listen to your child and provide the breaks, and your expectations for learning should be a little bit eased at this period of time. But we did have a great webinar last week with Courtney Angel Sante from the University of Maine, and she's also the lead PBIS coach for the state of Maine Department of Education. This is a live link. I provided at the end though as a resource for you. It's also on our website, and it's on our Facebook page, and it's on our YouTube channel. She gives a lot of different at-home things you can be doing for positive behavior interventions and supports, more than I would have time to go in with you today. So I would recommend, when you do have a chance, to go ahead and check that resource out, as she provides some really great at-home strategies, some of which, you know, one of the things that we talk about here is we're all home, so we have access to the pantry. And so providing a basket of snacks during the course of the day that can allow for your child to access on their own. And so they're approved snacks. So it's not constant eating. It sort of puts a limit on what they are eating. And when they're gone, they're gone. And so that was a great suggestion that I hadn't thought of, because I feel like when we get bored or tired, the first complaint that's coming out is I'm hungry. And it's really sort of trying to identify, are you hungry or are you bored? And this is Sammy peeking in right now because we're doing at-home learning. You can wave and say hi.
Hey.
Okay, thank you. So I would check out Courtney's webinar. It was extremely helpful for us. So a reality check with a little bit of this information that's come your way. Most of us are not teachers. Most of us are parents of children with special health care needs. Most of us also do not have teaching degrees. And most of us do not have the experience of understanding the gaps that our child has experienced. So I would be kind to yourselves, and I would remember these things. Feeling overwhelmed and ill-equipped and worried and tired are all expected and normal things. So be kind to yourself. Being exposed firsthand to your child's education shortfalls can be eye-opening and traumatic, but it's normal. Again, be kind to yourself. We're getting a lot of feedback from families, and I think I've even experienced this myself, that it's really hard right now to acknowledge that, not only are you trying to teach your child, but that you're also coming firsthand, face-to-face with the gaps that your child is facing. And acknowledging that and understanding that, yeah, that's really, really hard and eye-opening and can be traumatic for you is okay. And acknowledge that feeling and be with that feeling. What we're encouraging families not to do is to get stuck in that feeling and having it stop you from being able to provide the education or the supports that your child needs. So it's okay to feel that, but try not to get stuck in that feeling. I see that somebody had raised their hand, but I do not see anything in the chat box. Let me just double check it quickly. Okay, hold on. I'm going to check the chat box here really quick. I have, my child is intellectually disabled and his past class does no teaching, but is available by email. Adaptation to his level has been my job. Yeah, we're hearing that a lot from parents, Karen, and why I agree that it's not fair that that's becoming your job. When the school has decided just to close their doors and not provide any type of learning materials other than an email, it's falling completely in the laps of parents. And so understand that there's going to be regression. There's going to be work that's going to need to be done on the other end of this. Doing the best you can and providing some in-home learning opportunities is the best that you can do, and that's okay. We'll talk about some at-home learning opportunities that you can provide as well. Melinda said the learning without tears, where you would find keyboarding without tears, is available to anyone for free for 90 days. You just need to go to their website and sign up. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to click on the hand. It's okay, Melinda. Thank you for that resource. There are a lot of websites that are providing free for 90 days or 30 days or 60 days. We've provided on our website a resource list where we've vetted all of these resources that are coming to us to make sure that they're not requiring parents to enter a credit card number in. There are some of these free trials that are requiring credit card numbers to be submitted, and we want to try to make it as easy as possible for parents where they can just click on the link and get the resource. So that resource is up on our webpage as well, and it's on our Facebook page as well. Journaling is a great idea to keep track. Thank you, Karen. Yes, and that was one of our suggestions to parents. When you talk about applying daily living, things that you're doing at home can become lessons for your children on a daily basis. And one of those things is journaling. Not only does it help with social, emotional, and getting their thoughts and ideas out on paper as to what they're experiencing right now, because it's something that they've never experienced before, and none of us have ever experienced before. It also practices their comprehension skills, their reading skills, their writing skills, and OT. So in one simple exercise, you might be hitting on 4 or 5 different areas of concern for your child. We've also posted on our Facebook page and Twitter page this morning a great idea that came from Nancy Cronin, the Executive Director for the Developmental Disabilities Council, is providing No, not right now, please. Is providing a, sorry for the interruption, is providing a time capsule, putting together a time capsule for your family together. It's a great activity. It can be something that your child decides to write. It can be something that, an object that your child remembers that reminds them of what's going on, because this is a very unique experience. Putting it together with every family member, adding a little piece of the time capsule and talking about it, putting it together and burying it for future generations to dig up together at some point in time. Deciding, who you want to write your letter to. Is it your, your great grandchild, or, so on and so forth, is a fun activity to do, and a great idea. It came from the Developmental Disability Council. So I thought that was a great idea, and it's another fun way to implement daily academics into your child's life. Moving on with the reality check, I would take your cues from your child, provide breaks, and be okay with not getting it all done. There are going to be days where maybe your child just doesn't do anything, and that's okay. What you really want to do is try to concentrate on reading, writing, and math. Those are the 3 high academic areas. And if your child's not into sitting down and doing the lesson that day, we're eating 3 meals a day together. Have them prepare a meal. Sometimes that requires measuring. It requires skills like cutting, spreading. Those type of things can be worked into fine motor skills, into reading. Following a recipe can fall into sequencing, can also fall into measuring, which can be math. So something as simple as preparing a meal, again, can hit 4 or 5 different areas for your student, and it's not requiring to sit down and do the work. When the weather cooperates, unlike today, maybe going for a nature's walk, but actually today provides a great way for them to get online and check out what the weather's doing, and why the weather pattern is happening. It could be a great science lesson. Monitoring the wind gusts could be another great science lesson for children. So finding daily activities that can work into your child's academic plan can make it easier for you, can make it fun for them, and it might help to alleviate some of the anxiety around your child having to complete daily tasks that just aren't happening in your home. Sorry, I skipped take your cues from your child, provide breaks, and be okay. Oh no, I said that. I'm sorry. Educational moments can happen within daily living. Look for those opportunities and try to have fun with it. And I just sort of touched base on that as well. So what if my child's school is open and I don't feel safe sending my child? This is happening right now with some special purpose private schools that have remained open. And we've seen some of this at the pre-K level as well. I believe Margaret Murphy and Woodford's just decided to close this past week. So if your child's school has remained open, or if they reopen and public schools don't reopen, what's important to remember is if you don't feel safe sending them to school, then you need to get a medical provider's note saying that they cannot attend due to their condition. If you have a medical provider's note saying they cannot attend because it puts them at too high at risk, the school is responsible for providing materials at home, because they're responsible for providing them access to a free and appropriate public education. If you decide, and it's a parent's choice, to just keep them at home, then the school's not responsible. They may do so, but they're not responsible for providing anything to a child at home. If a student becomes infected, and this would apply to even our distance learning right now, if a student becomes infected, or if they require some type of hospitalization for some other reason while we're doing at-home learning, you need to make sure the school knows, and they need to approach it as a hospitalization. So what needs to be monitored is the student's physical ability to be able to do work. And if they're not able to do work, then the school understands that they're not able to do work because it's a medical situation. And then once they are able to do work, making sure that you are providing the school with updates, because their work may not be full right away. They may have to slowly increase incrementally what they're able to do based on how they're feeling. And so making sure that you are communicating with the school about how much work you feel they're capable of doing as you slowly increase that amount as they feel better. So that communication with the school still needs to happen. Some schools are still recording absence days, and some are, basing that on if a child is checking in online, or they're requiring if a child's sick to call in and leave a message. So this is different for each local district. So it's important that you make sure you check with your district on if they're still requiring you to do that. If a student is not able to access remote instruction due to their illness because they are medically fragile or because of the significance of their disability, An IEP meeting will need to be held to discuss some type of learning activity and or compensatory education. And I'm going to get into what we need to think about when we talk about IEP meetings during this time. So I will make sure that I cover that for you. Let me just double check my chat box right now. My son asked to try geocaching as a way to get out of a house. That's awesome. I love that idea. Reading maps, and it's something that you can do to get out of the house without having to worry about coming into contact and still be able to social distance. Finding the geocache at the end is such a great reward, and then they can leave something behind. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you for sharing, Sierra. Just double checking my notes to make sure I'm covering it all for you. So IEP meetings during the crisis. So some districts are holding IEP meetings virtually, but if you as a parent are unable to attend or access that virtual IEP meeting, they cannot hold the meeting without you. So it's not like when school's in session and you're trying to find a time that works and the school gives you a couple opportunities, and then sometimes if you can't find a time that works, the school says, well, we're gonna hold the IEP meeting without you. They can't do this right now. So if you don't have access to attend virtually, the school cannot hold the IEP meeting. What's important to remember is that if you are holding an IEP meeting virtually and everybody is able to attend, this shouldn't be to adjust the IEP for the crisis right now. So no IEP should be adjusted right now to reduce services to address the school closings. We want to leave all services as is. We're going to revisit the IEPs in September and October when we're looking to address our child's present level of performance, because regression will happen. What we want to make sure we're doing is looking at the services that they were receiving while they were in school. What you don't want to do is reduce the number of services that you are currently receiving and then have to go back and advocate to increase those services and then maybe not be at the level you were before school had this emergency. So we want to make sure that we have IEPs in place and staying in place that were present before we had the at-home learning and the COVID-19 emergency. Do not let a school reduce the number of services to address this current emergency. You do not need to do that. If an IEP expires during this time, it is automatically extended as is. Nobody will be disqualified because of an IEP expiring. So in other words, IEPs have, you have annual IEPs so that you can re-up the services on a yearly basis and look at the goals and look at the accommodations and modifications. Usually if an IEP is going to expire and an IEP meeting hasn't been held, a parent signs a waiver so that the current IEP can be extended. That's not happening right now, and that's okay. It does not need to happen. The Office of Special Education Programs has told districts and given guidance to districts to just continue to extend the current IEP that's in place, and that nobody will need to be requalified for special education. There'll just be an IEP meeting that will happen as soon as can possibly happen, whether virtually or in person, and you will continue to use that same IEP that had expired. So in other words, there's no expiration dates on IEPs right now. Change of placement, for some of you that might be well-versed in MUSER or IDEA, if you're out of school for more than 10 days and you have an IEP, this is considered a change of placement. But that would only be a change of placement if it's a change of placement when you're considering what all other typically developing students have as placement. So in other words, this isn't a change of placement because all typically developing students are receiving their learning at home. So that does not apply to this circumstance. In extended school year services, again, I talked about where there has not been guidance from Maine Department of Education right now on extended school year. There has not been a decision made as to whether in-classroom instruction will continue during that period of time or if it's going to still be virtual learning. You know, my best guess would be if your child is receiving virtual learning or at-home distance plans for the regular school year and the school remains closed, that extended school year will continue to be these virtual learning plans and distant learning plans. But no decision's been made on whether or not we're going to be able to reopen our schools during that time. So stay posted for that. Part C, so this is our early intervention services, ages 0 through 2. I got an update from Roy Fowler, the director of CDS last week. So this is current as of Friday of last week. All case managers should have been in contact with all families by now. And if not, Roy wants to hear from you. So at the very least, you should be hearing from case managers. Part C is not closed. The buildings are shuttered and some of the staff are off to take care of their families, but Part C is open and you should be hearing from your case managers. CDS staff are still active. They are providing services and they are still reimbursing their contractors. So these services are all happening via telehealth. If you're unable to, or the telehealth is not working for your child, so if that virtual platform is not working or you're unable to access that platform, again, you should be speaking with your case manager and they should be providing some in-home support to you to be able to do some of the exercises at home. And you should be keeping track of all of the services that you are missing at this time so that when in-person services resume, you can have that data and that diary available to you to be able to negotiate on the new IEP, the services that need to be increased based on regression that your child might be experiencing. Again, virtual services are available, but the technology needs to be in place and the parents need to be available to assist. So, you know, unlike some of our high schoolers and middle schoolers who might be able to do some work independently online, 0 to 2-year-olds need our parents there to be able to do the activities with them. And if you're unable to provide that support, you make sure you let your case manager know. It doesn't mean that you lose the opportunity or you lose the services. It means that you're unable to access them. And in looking at an IEP in the future, when in-person services resume, you'll be able to hopefully increase the number of services you'll get in order to be able to help with that regression that your child's going to experience. And again, at the very least, if you're unable to access virtual, you should be having conversations with your case managers in regards to what you are able to access at this time and a plan moving forward. They may be able to provide you with some in-home activities that you're able to do, even if you're not able to access a virtual platform in connection to a therapist. Checking the chat box real quick. Karen says, my child is due to transfer to a new high school as of June. Who would be responsible for ESY, current district or new district? Karen, and I'm going to talk a little bit about transition IEP, and this would apply to your child as well. If you're unable to hold the transition IEP meeting at this time, as your child transitions to a new high school, or as your child transitions from kindergarten, from pre-K to kindergarten, or as your child transitions to adult services, the school district that your child is currently under with the IEP is still responsible for your child's education until you're able to have that transition meeting. I have not heard from the Office of Aging and Disability Services. I have put an email into one of the directors over there to ask them how they're moving forward with children who are transitioning to adulthood and with assessments that need to be accessed during this period of time. I'm hoping to hear from them. We do have a webinar on Wednesday about transitioning to adulthood, and I would like to be able to answer those questions for parents. I'm hoping to have some more guidance for all of you on that circumstance. I have yet to hear from that office, so I'm not sure how that is moving forward. So kindergarten transition meetings, Part C kids ready to transition to Part B will be carried by CDS until the transition meeting can happen, so there will be no gap in services. So if you're unable to hold the transition meeting virtually or in person sometime this summer prior to the transition happening, CDS will be carrying all children, so there will not be a gap in services. Our hope is that by the summer, those transition meetings can happen. The majority of school districts have agreed to hold transition meetings remotely, although a few have not and plan to delay them until the situation is over. Again, that's a local district decision, but if a parent is not able to attend, the district cannot have that meeting unless the parent is able to attend. So Roy did tell me that a gap in services will not happen, and CDS will continue to carry these children until the transition meetings can occur and an IEP can be created for the district where your child will be attending kindergarten. If evaluations and observations are pending, CDS is doing the following, and this looks like a lot of guidance, but there's a lot of unknowns still here. So, and again, this came right from Roy on Friday. They are continuing to talk through this with their sites to find out what would be the best practice. They're being very cautious about making any inappropriate eligibility determinations with evaluation results and observations that may not be valid and reliable. They acknowledge that for those children for whom at the transition IEP, it's determined that additional evaluations are necessary, This will also be a challenge, and they have not yet devised a plan moving forward. And they are looking to technical assistance providers and evaluation tool publishers to determine a way in which evaluations and observations can be conducted and have accurate results through a virtual method. So I'm keeping my eye on this. Roy has promised to keep me updated as this is, you know, a fast moving process and things are changing. It's important to note that if there are some tools that they decided to use virtually, as a parent, they should be making you aware of those tools, and you should have the right to object to those tools if you don't think that they're going to provide an accurate picture of your child's learning. Best practice here would be for you to have some discussions with your child's pre-K teachers, because those are the individuals that have been working with your child for 2, maybe 3 years now, that have a great understanding for your child's present level of performance, even though there might be some regression right now. They see your child, how they interact socially and emotionally in the classroom, and making sure that they have a voice at any transition IEP meeting if observations and assessments have not happened, so that they can provide the most accurate picture for what your child looks like in a classroom learning environment. So make sure you're having those conversations with your pre-K teachers. Let me just check the chat box real quick. Okay, nope, we're good. So when school resumes, what we can expect. So what we should expect is that all our children's skills will regress. Even our typically developing students are going to regress at this time because nobody's receiving a full day of learning. And it's really hard to teach new skills in a virtual platform. So the recommended practices that are best practices right now that are being recommended through Maine DOE, also the Federal Office of DOE, and things that we have researched and found online, is that you want to schedule an IEP meeting to address your child's regression. Now keep in mind that districts are going to be inundated with IEP meetings September and October of next year, if that is in fact when in-classroom instruction resumes. So what you might want to do is start emailing your special education teachers and requesting an IEP meeting for when in-classroom instruction resumes as soon as possible, so that you can be the first one on the list. And I would recommend when you send this email out that you're sending it out to your special education teacher, your special education director. You're also sending it out to the principal of the building and possibly your superintendent. Now, they're probably not going to schedule an IEP meeting right now for September, October, but what you're doing is you're putting your written request in now, and they might respond to you saying, thank you for your written request. We'll work on scheduling these when in-classroom instruction has resumed. And at least what you've done is gotten your request in and sort of beaten the line of parents who are going to be looking for an IEP meeting. What you want to do at these IEP meetings is reevaluate your child's present level of performance, which is also referred to as PLOP or PLOP. When we are going to need to create new goals, new accommodations, new modifications, and new services for your child. So what you want to keep in mind is that diary that you've been keeping of what your child's been doing, what they haven't been doing, where you feel like they've regressed. You're bringing that to the meeting as recorded data for what your child did during this virtual learning time period. So you can show them, you know, maybe we were concentrating on reading, writing, and math. We didn't get a whole lot of science, and there wasn't a whole lot of social studies in. I did my best with OT and speech and PT, but you know, the gross motor and fine motor, I noticed their handwriting's a little bit more sloppy, or they've lost the ability to write at all, or their reading level has maybe dropped. You know, their ability to communicate their needs might have dropped as well. So all those things you want to make sure that you're noting and bringing it into this IEP meeting. Essentially, what's going to need to be done for every single kiddo is we're going to need to address and find out where their present level of performance currently is. And then the IEP needs to be written to address where their present level of performance currently is, which may mean you may need to increase some services in certain areas. Keep in mind though, this is a balancing act. So parents oftentimes, and I can be at fault as well as this, is we think that we're gonna increase services and that's the best option for a child. But keep in mind that increasing services also means increasing the amount of time that your child's being pulled out of a classroom, and increasing the amount of time or decreasing the amount of time that your child's able to interact with their typically developing peers. So along with academic regression, there's going to be social and emotional regression for every single one of our students. And so we want to make sure that what we're asking for, we're balancing out the needs of our child at this specific time period. And some of that social emotional interaction may be more important than some of the academic pullout areas or the occupational pullout, speech therapy pullout, physical therapy pullout. The increase of pullout time means there's a decrease in an opportunity for your child to interact with peers. And sometimes that social and emotional learning is just as important as the academic learning. So it's a balancing act. And what you put in place in September might not work in October either. So keep an eye out on these new IEPs. We're going to all have to keep a due diligence and watching how it's affecting our children, and some adjustments will most likely need to be made. Just talked about bringing a diary of what your child's received for services, accommodations, and modifications during the crisis, and bringing data such as work which was completed. An example of work can oftentimes be the best way to show regression. And a diary of the difficulties. Behaviors are going to see, you're going to see an increase. You're going to see a lot of refusals of work to be done. And as this goes on, I expect that the behaviors will increase. So keeping a diary of some of the most difficult days to make sure that we're addressing that social emotional piece when kiddos go back to school. What's important to remember here is compensatory services are services which a school is required to provide to a child when they have not received all the services as indicated on their IEP. However, in this case, during this period of time, it is important to remember that everybody's day is shortened, and therefore services on an IEP will also be shortened without being considered a violation of an IEP, which requires compensatory services. So what the Office of Special Education Programs is advising out of the federal offices of Washington, D.C. is that instead of looking at compensatory services, is that we're looking again at the present level of performance and recreating IEPs to address that child's present level of performance. And that'll address the services, and there may be an increase in certain services on the IEP to make sure that your child's present level of performance is being addressed. That's a lot of information. I'm just going to double check the chat box here. So thank you for noting that we will be inundated with requests for meetings. We will not be guaranteeing anyone be first, and will not be promising to meet before school resumes. We want to meet, we'll need to meet, but we also need for our service providers and teachers to be actually providing services to our students as well. So please be patient. And I think it's important to remember that during this period of time, not only are you as a parent navigating this for the first time, not only is your student navigating this for the first time, but our school districts are navigating this for the very first time. Nobody has ever done this before. And I'll be the first to say that I believe the area of government here in the state of Maine that is doing the best job is our Maine Department of Education. They have been consistently keeping Maine Parent Federation involved, allowing us to provide some feedback to teachers as well as to what we're hearing from families. They do a special education Zoom meeting every morning at 10 a.m. When I am able to attend, I do attend. I feel like the back and forth on those Zoom meetings has been phenomenal. There's a lot of great sharing going on. There's a lot of teachers that just feel so badly right now, and they miss their kids desperately. I really believe Maine Department of Education has done the best job here in the state of Maine out of all of our governmental agencies here in Maine, communicating with parents and providing services to not only your local districts, to your teachers, but also to you as well. There's some resources that I'll provide for you at the end of this workshop that shows you some of the pages that the Maine Department of Education that I've put up. And there's specific resources for parents, and they're updating those on a regular basis. Yes, you're right. And some are navigating both being parents and teachers. Just like our parents are most times navigating being a parent, a teacher, and trying to work professionally, which is what you saw as my child meandered in here during this webinar. So we're all out of our elements. And so yes, being patient is something that we all need to try to do during this period of time. I wanted to address, okay, so this is, I'm sorry, I read about compensatory services without putting this slide up, but so they're services which school is required to provide to a child when they have not received all services as indicated on an IEP. They will probably not be considered because everybody's day is shortened, and therefore services on an IEP will also be shortened without being considered a violation of the IEP, which requires compensatory services. Virtual IEP meetings. If schools are closed, it is a local district's decision to either reschedule an IEP meeting or offer them virtually. So check with your local district. And again, if they're offering them virtually and you're not able to attend because you don't have access to the technology, then they cannot hold them without you. What if schools do not reopen prior to September? We have not received a lot of guidance on this, but please stay tuned. However, virtual IEPs and summer IEPs may need to be considered to discuss regression, compensatory services, placement, and transition. You know, I would say, as was mentioned in the chat box, in-person IEPs most likely are not going to be held until September and October of next year. If you're able to do a virtual IEP meeting, I would encourage that. However, it should not be to address or change services on an IEP to address this emergency. What you should be looking at is putting together an IEP to best meet your child's needs when in-classroom instruction resumes. I'm going to check the chat box. I am in District 6 right now, who is the Commissioner of Special Education. I only have had this kiddo in my home since March 2020 and for voc rehab for the school district. Okay, so the Commissioner, so the Director of Special Education's name is Erin Frazier. And there's actually a resource at the end of this webinar that gives you her Director's Corners page. So that would provide that to you. The Commissioner of Education is Commissioner Macon. And then the Director of Vocational Rehabilitation is through the Department of Labor, and that is Libby Stone Sterling. That's through the governmental offices. If you're asking me for who's doing voc rehab for the school, every school district has their own voc rehab counselors, and they should be in touch with you as well. If you're not hearing from your voc rehab counselor, and if your district is not providing you any feedback on that, Libby Stone Sterling would be the person to get in touch to, because she's going to want to hear about that. And she's the Director of Vocational Rehabilitation within the state of Maine. And if that didn't answer your question, Karen, just post another question in the chat box. Hopefully it did, but if it didn't, just let me know and I'll do my best to answer. And here are the resources that I've been discussing during this workshop. So Maine Parent Federation has put up the COVID-19 resources documents. If you, the link that it can be found is www.mpf.org documents COVID-19 resources. We also have our PBIS at home webinar. If you just go to our webpage, mpf.org, and go to our online trainings and scroll to the bottom, you'll see at the bottom of the page, we are posting a recorded webinars, and this one is up there and on our webpage. So just click on that link and it'll take you right to the YouTube channel where you can find it. Same for kindergarten transition. That's the actual long link. Again, go to that same place. It's listed right there with the PBS at home. This same workshop will be listed there as well. And all of these can be found on our Facebook page. The Maine Department of Education has a Special Education Director's Corner, and they also have a new COVID-19 website. So the Special Education Director's Corner website is that first link, and the second link is their new website. And their website has specific resources for both teachers and for parents. So it's a really good website. I would check that out. Disability Rights at Maine, which is our protection and advocacy agency here in Maine, also has guidance, and these are the two links for the guidance that they're providing for students with special needs who are currently experiencing virtual learning or at-home learning. And then this is all of our websites and social media pages and ways to get in touch with us. Maine Parent Federation, while we're not in the office, while all of us are working virtually from home, you can still call our office and leave us a message. We're checking our messages on an hourly basis and getting back to you. You can also send us an email to our general email mailbox if you're unsure. You can find that on our website. And then we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and we're on YouTube. I'm going to stop my share right now so that I can put up a poll for this webinar. Since we are nonprofit and grant funded, we look to get some feedback and evaluations. Zoom has been hit or miss with polling, so can you just let me know in the chat box if you're not able to see the poll? Sometimes ending it and relaunching it works. And I'll also provide you the opportunity at this time to ask any more questions in the chat box. I don't think Dylan had any questions on Facebook Live. So, oh, I see people are responding to the poll. So great. Thank you, Dylan. No questions on Facebook Live. So if you would all just take a few minutes to answer the poll, that would be awesome. I really appreciate it. We're going to hang here for a couple more minutes. If you have any more questions, please feel free to post them. If you did not get the webinar email to you, let me know. Put that in the chat box here as well, and I can email that to you. We made that available to all our parents as well. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope this information was useful, and please keep an eye out on our Facebook page. We're looking to get a webinar out on self-advocacy for young adults who are transitioning. We do have a webinar on Wednesday at the same time at 3 p.m. on transitioning to adulthood. And I'm also looking to collaborate with the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Services after April break on some in-home learning ideas coming from their offices, especially as students come back from April break. Okay. Good. Kathleen says, thanks. I did send this out to all of our parents on our school notices. We are really trying to outreach to parents and support them and work together. Again, thanks. Challenging times. Excellent. I may share your PowerPoint with all families in my district. I am the director in Wells. Sounds great. Feel free to do that. You can also provide them with the link and let them know that we're here from them with any questions that they have. How can we register for the webinar on Wednesday? So Stacy, if you go to our Facebook page and look at events, the webinar is posted there with a registration link. If you'd like me to email you the registration link, just provide me, actually, I'll just write down your name because I have your email address for this webinar. So I'll write down your name and make sure that I send you out a link for registration for that webinar as soon as this one's over. You're welcome. So again, we'll continue to monitor the chat box for the next few minutes. Otherwise, if you guys are all set and you've done the poll for us, thank you so much for joining us, and stay safe. And please reach out to us with anything that you feel we may be able to help you with during this time.